The Shmuz this evening is sponsored Le'ilui Nishmas Hatinok Daniel Baruch Ala Shalom Ben Eliezer Shlomo. Yaakov Avinu lived for 17 years in Mitzrayim, and very close to his deathbed, he calls in his son Yosef, and he has a last conversation with Yosef. And in that conversation, he says something very interesting. He says in the pasuk, "Vani bivoi mipodon mesa alai rochel ba'oretz beretz Canaan." When I was coming from Podon along the path, along the way, Rochel died when I was still outside of the city, and I buried her there outside on the road. And that's what the pasuk says. And Rashi says what Yaakov Avinu was doing with that expression was answering a long-standing question that Yosef had on Yaakov. And says Rashi as follows: Yadati sheyesh belibcha alai. I knew that you had tainas against me. Yaakov says, Yosef, I knew that you had complaints against me. Why didn't I at least bring your mother to be buried in the city? Why did I bury her right there on the road? Why didn't I at least bring her into a city? It seems like it's not covered a mace. And I know for a long time you had a complaint against me. Dalacha, you should know, Shalpia Dibur Kavarti Sham. Because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's direct command, I buried her there. Shetia Lazora, that she should be a help. And Rashi goes on to explain that Yaakov was saying that when the Zeradan was going to exile the Jewish people, they were going to pass by that road. Rachel would come out and cry, Mivakesh ala rachamim. Rachel would beg mercy on them, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would say, Yischa lefulasecha. Hashem would listen to her cries, not Avram, not Yitzchak, not Yaakov, but Rachel's cries, her cries alone would be answered. And therefore Yaakov said, I buried her right there on the road because she'd be able to intercede, she'd be able to be a melitz for the Klal Yisrael. So do not think it was without thought. Do not think I was dishonoring her. There was a cheshbon, there was a reason. Okay, and that's Rashi. And the only question that I think is rather obvious and begs to be asked is, if that's true, and if it was a pia dibur, why did Yaakov wait 17 years to tell Yosef? This is his beloved son Yosef, who has a taina, who has a complaint. You didn't treat my mother with the right kavod. You buried her not even in the Maras Machpelah, not even in a city. You buried her literally on the road. And for many years, Yosef had a taina against Yaakov. Yaakov knew it, and he didn't simply answer that it was a pia dibur. Hashem told me to do it. And the question is, why didn't Yaakov just say it earlier? The Siftei Chachamim brings down the answer to that. And that is that Yaakov Avinu did not want to express bad tidings, bad news. It's sufficient to tell the bad news when you have to, but he didn't feel it appropriate to say it earlier, and for that reason he kept quiet. This was the last chance. Yosef did have to know the reasoning, otherwise maybe he'd make a mistake, maybe he would misunderstand. Therefore, at the last opportunity that Yaakov has to tell his son, he'll tell him. But until that time, I'm not the bearer of bad tidings. I don't want to tell you, and therefore he was silent. Now, if we take nothing else from this chazal, just a very simple observation, and that is, it had to be quite difficult for Yaakov to be quiet in this situation. This was his beloved son, who he mourned 22 years over. Keep in mind the fact that Yosef was not just the chosen of Yaakov. Yaakov Avinu saw himself completely in Yosef. All of the wisdom, all of the Torah he learned, the godless, the sitkis, he viewed Yosef as his prodigy, as his beloved son. And for many, many years, Yaakov knew that Yosef had a taina, was upset. There was something in his heart that his father didn't treat his mother properly, and he didn't say anything. Why didn't he say anything? Because I'm not the type of person who speaks bad news. I'm Domet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is the meitiv. I'm going to only be a person who gives good tidings. I give good. I don't cause other people tsar. And if we take nothing else from this chazal, just a simple understanding how far a person will take that concept of my objective in life is to be a benefactor. My objective is to help, to bring good news. No matter what the cost, I don't bring people tsar. That alone would be a very powerful lesson and an interesting chiddush. But what I'd like to ask as a bit of a question is, let's grant that for a minute. Let's grant, in fact, that Yaakov Avinu adopted this idea that he doesn't bring bad tidings, he only tells good news. And in fact, let's assume for a moment that this would have caused Yosef tsar. After all, hearing the fact that many generations later the Jewish people are going to go into exile, they're going to suffer, that would cause Yosef pain. But the reality is there's no Isser for Yaakov to say these words. There's no prohibition. Nowhere in the Torah does it say you can't tell news that's bad. This is what we call a midah tova. And what I'd like to ask as a question is the following. How could Yaakov stand for 17 years and not say anything? There's no Isser, there's no prohibition. It's a midah tova, and he knows that his son, his beloved son, his son who he loves dearly, has tainas against him. And it's not for a week, it's not for a month. For almost 17 years, Yaakov Avinu is silent, holds his tongue, not because of an Isser, not because of Lashon Hara, not because of some specific losasei, but because of some epis midah tova. And the question is, where did he get the fortitude, and where did he get the strength to control himself for that long a period of time and not say anything? And I'd like to focus on that second point this evening a little bit, because I think it has a lot to teach us about the human being. And let me begin in trying to answer that with the following observation. Many years ago, when I was a high school Rebbe, I gave my guys a Musar exercise. I asked them each to take out a piece of paper and a pen, and I said, I'm going to start my stopwatch, and I want you to do exactly what I say to do from the moment I start my stopwatch, and I'm going to stop it 60 seconds later. And I told them what I wanted them to do. I started my stopwatch, and I let them do what it was. What I asked them to do was to write down all of the noises that they heard around them. I started the stopwatch, I went click, and everybody started writing. And amazingly, each guy had a list of the noises in the classroom. This guy's scratching his pen, this guy's moving. I hear the fluorescent lights, it's so loud. There's a guy outside in the street. There's noise of a creaking door down the hall. Each guy had a list. Most of the lists, by the way, were not the same, but each guy had a long list. After 60 seconds, I stopped. Okay, give me the list. Let's see them. Now, the reason why I asked them to do this is because this demonstrates a very interesting phenomenon that Hashem put into the human mind. And that's called a filtering mechanism. The filtering mechanism is something that allows us humans to hear, see, be aware of many different impetus and stimuli, and choose to ignore them. It's not that I don't hear them, it's that I make a conscious or unconscious choice to ignore them. They're in my peripheral vision or my peripheral thinking, but I choose not to pay attention to them. I remember as a student myself in high school, I had one friend who was actually studious. One friend was actually studious. And I remember we were once riding to yeshiva, and he was reading a book. And I turned back to him and I said, hey, and I called out his name. No response. And I called out his name again. No response. He's looking in the book and he's looking in the book. A third, and I screamed his name out. No response. About 10, 15 minutes later, he closes the book and says, yeah, what do you want? You see, it wasn't that he didn't hear me. He chose to ignore me, which is a very interesting power called filtering mechanism, and there's a particular part of the brain that allows us to do that. Now, the reason why I think this is very important to understand is because, as you know, probably one of the most commonly described symptoms in our school system today is something called ADD. If you're not quite sure what that is, there's a little poem that my son loves to sing to me. It goes something like this. ADD, ADD, it's as easy as 1, 2, hey, there goes a butterfly. Distractibility is a very much noted phenomenon, and ADHD really has 3 characteristics. One is distractibility, where either a noise or a person's thoughts will distract them. Very difficult to stay on task. And the second one is the hyperactivity, which is well known. But the third is very interesting. The third is impulsivity. Now, distractibility Hyperactivity and impulsivity are the three hallmarks of ADHD. Now, it's very interesting to note why those three run together. Distractibility is because, you're distracted. The noises or the feel of your clothing or your own thoughts distract you. But what about this other thing called, not just hyperactivity, but this other thing called impulsivity? If you read Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, he describes very clearly why these go together. He says impulsivity basically is because there's an inhibitory part of the brain that normally acts like the traffic cop. Meaning, I'll hear a sound, I'll see a sight. The human brain will process as many as 10 million bits of information in a second. But there are only about 40 parts of those that I could actually pay attention to. There's a part of the brain that filters out the rest of the noise and allows me to pay attention to that which I've chosen to pay attention to. That part of the brain is what allows the brain to inhibit, to stop the other stimuli from distracting me, and allows me to concentrate on what I want to concentrate. Now, sometimes that part of the brain, the reticular activation system, is underdeveloped in children. When it's underdeveloped, they become easily distracted. But it's not just that they become easily distracted, they become very impulsive. And the reason for it is quite simple. You see, if I see you with an interesting looking pen in your pocket, I'll look at it and be tempted maybe to reach for it. If a child has a really strong case of ADHD, he'll look at it, take it out of your pocket, and then think to himself whether he should have done it or shouldn't have done it. You see, the inhibition, the normal processing part where my brain says, stop, think, should you or shouldn't you, is a bit underdeveloped in some children, in some adults. And before they even have a chance to think about whether they should have or shouldn't have, the pen is already in their hand, and they then recognize that they've done something that they shouldn't have done. The point is, in the brain, there's this effect, there's a part of the brain that works as the traffic cop. There's a stimuli, there's a feeling, there's a sensation, there's a part of the brain, the reticular activation system, that says, stop. We are going to concentrate only on this. We're not going to do that activity. We're not going to reach into the pocket of that person because I'm in control here and I'm going to keep balance. Now again, if that part of the brain is underdeveloped, then there are a number of issues. Distractibility is one of them, hyperactivity is another, and impulsivity is the third. Nothing to do with our shmuz. However, it is very important as a parent and as an educator or as a friend of parents to be aware that these symptoms are very real. And the reality is that if a child grows up doing lousy in school, they're going to have a lot of trouble with their self-esteem. They're going to have a lot of trouble being an effective individual. I am not by any means a pill pusher, and if you know me, I'm very, very into health. I work out regularly, I eat very carefully, and I'm very, very against medications that aren't needed. However, if you have a child who is not functioning well in school, and your child is diagnosed with clear ADHD symptoms, it is a very wise idea for you to find the best solution, which oftentimes may involve medication. The medications now are very guarded, and even if you'll say, but wait a minute, medicines and all the stigma, and who knows about the health issues, I guarantee you, having a second grader failing out of school, and knowing that from the time he or she is 7 years of age until they're 17, they're going to be not just labeled a failure, they will be a failure, is devastating. Far more dangerous, far more damaging to them than any type of the health issues associated. And it's a very wise idea to look into and certainly discuss with people who are very knowledgeable the potential and possibility of being helped with meds. But that's not the point of tonight's observation here. The point is that there's a part of the brain that controls all of the various stimuli. I'm hit at any given time by sounds, sights, thoughts, with a barrage, with a huge barrage of information, a huge barrage of data. If you've ever driven a car, you'll know that there are thousands of things going on. Besides just the billboards that you're trying to ignore, there are all types of things happening, all types of things going on, and your ability to focus on one particular thing is a magnificent facility that Hashem gave us that's specifically relegated to one part of the brain, and that part of the brain allows us to control what we do. Now, the reality is that ADD and life nisyonos have an awful lot in common. Because if you've ever had a nisayon in your life, you'll note that it's pretty much the same sort of thing. There's a stimuli, there's an impulse, maybe a desire, and you will either choose to ignore it or not. And it may come once, it may come a second time, it may come a third time, it may come with a great amount of passion and power, or maybe just a weak sort of thing. But your ability to be the master of your ship, to be in control, is the ability to pass any nisayon. And it always stems with one sort of impulse, one sort of desire, and the choice of I will control it or not. When you're dealing with concentrating, it's a very great task and oftentimes beyond a child's ability. And for many people also, many nisyonos may be beyond where they're holding right now, but that is the anatomy of a nisayon: impulse, desire, control, that element of my brain, that element of my personality, saying, I will not give in, I'm in charge over here. I believe that that is the answer to Yaakov Avinu. You see, Yaakov Avinu was the master of his ship, in total, absolute control. And what that means is, whenever he uttered an expression, anytime he opened his mouth, it was weighed, measured, and controlled. And if in fact, according to his principle, he stated and held that I do not bring bad tidings, that's not the way I act, then he would not open his mouth, and it wouldn't matter longing for his son looking down upon him, social pressure, societal pressure, it didn't matter. I don't say these types of things, and it doesn't matter for a week, a month, 17 years, he would not utter that expression. And I think it's a powerful illustration of what a human being in control of himself is. Yaakov Avinu was totally, absolutely in control of himself. And when he made the decision that Dai Letzora B'Shaita, I don't bring bad tidings, it's enough, he'll have to hear about when he hears about it, that decision was made and nothing would change him, because his mouth didn't just prattle away, he didn't just babble, he controlled every utterance, every fragment of speech, and that is a very great man. Now, I think that this concept has an awful lot of relevance to us, and I'll share with you what I mean. You all know the famous picture of the Chavetz Chaim, the white beard, the yarmulke, forehead exposed. It's a very famous picture, and as you're probably aware, it's also very debatable whether, in fact, that's an accurate picture of the Chavetz Chaim or not. If you've seen other pictures of the Chavetz Chaim, it looks nothing like the other pictures. And many people who lived in the time of the Chavetz Chaim say, it had no shaychus. That picture, the famous Chavetz Chaim picture, has no connection to the Chavetz Chaim. It wasn't him. Now, whether it was or wasn't isn't my issue. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever really know. But let's imagine for a minute that it was not. Let's imagine for a minute, for whatever which reason, Hashem decided that a simple tailor living in Radin should be the person who's going to be the hallmark of the Chavetz Chaim. His picture is going to go on all the trading cards and all the Chavetz Chaim Heritage Center materials that are going to go out. He is going to be the face of the Chavetz Chaim. Okay, obviously there was some schus, some reason. Hashem decided that simple tailor should be the face of the Chavetz Chaim. Okay. Now let's imagine for a minute the following also. Let's imagine for a minute that, in fact, that's what happened. Let's imagine for a minute that one day we see that very man walk into shul. Oh my goodness, the Chavetz Chaim himself. The Chavetz Chaim himself comes in here. Everybody stands up. Oh, Rebbe, teach us. I have so many questions. Rebbe, could you teach me? And the man walks in. The honor, the accord, the kavod given to the man is remarkable. Everyone just standing in honor and awe of the person, until he opens his mouth. And then you realize that he's not the Chavetz Chaim, he's a simple tailor. And he doesn't know anything, and he has no wisdom, and he's just the face, but not the person. I once heard Moshe Chait say as follows. He once said that when a human being walks into the room, you see the greatness of a human. You see the dignity, you see the Tzelem Elokim. he walks in and the honor due to that person is unimaginable. And you have that sense of respect to that person. There he is, created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Look at the man. And then he opens his mouth. And it's all over. Because the godless, the greatness, the honor due to human being is destroyed when he prattles, when he opens his mouth and says the most nonsensical, stupid things, inane, dumb comments. And you quickly realize this is not who you thought it was. This may be the face of the Chavetz Chaim. It sure ain't the man. This is not the greatness that the Torah describes as godless Adam. And my friends, I want you to know that I see this on a rather regular basis. People dress nicely, they look respectable, they look like B'nai Torah, and then they open their mouths and it's all over. I sometimes want to say, just shut up. You look good. You look respected. Just close your mouth and you and I together will fool the world. What do we have to let everybody know? You don't have to let the secret out. I hate Abraham Lincoln once said it. His expression was, better to be silent and thought of as a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. But that's if you're making an expression of note, of worth. What about if you open your mouth just to prattle, just to talk, just to fill the room with noise? And on a rather regular basis, I hate to say, I've seen guys destroy their sense of dignity, destroy what other people look at them, see them as, by opening their mouth and uttering the most silly, inane comments that really just destroy a person's dignity. There is a concept, and that concept is HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a mouth. A peh is a very powerful machine. It is a machine that can create worlds or destroy worlds. If you ever read poetry, they talk about the eyes being the soul, being the window to the soul. If the eyes are the window to the soul, the mouth is the door, because it shows the world exactly who you are. And it lets the world know exactly who you are. But more than that, that is the way that you interact with other people. That is the way that you tell other people who you are. And that's the way you shape other people's worlds. And it is the most powerful machine that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. It affects things, changes things, and it really, really is a tool to be used extremely guardedly, extremely carefully. Now, with that being said, I'd like to share with you an interesting story that happened to me a little while ago. I was invited to a certain city as a speaker, and the person who wanted me to come there arranged for me to speak 8 times between Thursday night and Sunday morning, 8 times in 8 different locations. And he told me one of the places these guys must hear, they need the Shmuz, I want you to speak in this particular place by Shalat Shidduchs. I said, fine. So here, there, okay, fine. I get to this particular shul for Shalat Shidduchs. I have mincha there, and we all go into another room to eat Shalat Shidduchs. And I specifically asked the Rav of the shul before I began speaking, what time is Marv supposed to be scheduled for? What time do you normally bench? Because I know I don't want to go over the time. So I had it pretty well clocked out. I knew exactly when I should stop. And I began speaking. It was a lot less than I normally like to have to say a full developed shmuz, but I began keeping an eye on the clock. Maybe 20 minutes into the routine, actually a little bit earlier than that, I see a guy right next to me, right over here, talking. But not like, talking to his neighbor, as if like no one was there speaking. And he continues talking, not once, but a few times, noticeably talking. Now, I shouldn't have done this. But I felt like I was back in a high school shiurim. So what I did was I tried to politely, in a casual, joking way, sort of engage him. And I sort of said, listen, I don't mind any questions. I'll gladly answer right after. Please come right over me. I'll gladly answer, questions you have on the shmuz. It was a joke. It was kibitzing, right? I'm not sure if he said it or somebody else said it, but he did have a question. The question is, what time is Marav? Now, folks, let me tell you, when I got in the car after Marav, I told the person who invited me there, I said, the busha was so sweet. Wow. It's machaper on so many aveiros. Thank you. And I really felt that way. I have no tainas Rahman Hassan against the guy because the busha was really beautiful. It was Busha, by the way, is a very, very nice thing. If you're able to handle it, it's mechaper and it's free and it's easy. It doesn't even hurt. You know, if you have to suffer a broken rib, it really hurts. It's just a busha and it's done. Your avera is gone, whatever, and you're clean and you're good to go. So I have no tinus against the guy, and I'm fine with it. But here's an observation. Excuse my saying it this way. Idiot! What were you thinking? Whether Schaefer is a person deserving of respect or not, you don't know. Whether Schaefer knows how to learn or not, you don't have a clue. But he walks in supposedly as a Rav giving a Shmuz, and you have the audacity, the rank, raw chutzpah to say, yeah, I got a question. What time is Maariv? Where is your brain? What are you thinking? I promise you, he did not get paid money for that line. It's not like somebody said, a great line, $10,000 check right to you because you're such a good guy. He didn't profit from it. No one afterwards said, now I'm gonna do business only with you because you're such a smart guy. What he gained from it was zero. What he accomplished with it was potentially at least being Mavaza, another Jew, being Mavayish, somebody, Barabim, but there was no thought. It was not premeditated, and I want you to know, folks, not only don't I harbor any misgivings against him, I'm vada he didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't like he intentionally tried to shtuck somebody out. It was just a great line. Hey, just throw it out because it's a good line. And whatever, the mouth walks, the tongue wags, and whatever, things come out because, hey, it's talk, it's cheap, it doesn't matter. And that concept is indicative of a vast, vast misunderstanding of A, the greatness of the human, and B, the effects of words. And I think this is something that we see very, very often. I'd like to share with you something that I find on a common thread. Very often I've seen a guy may not learn that much as a high school student. He goes to work, and he also maybe doesn't learn that much. He learns a little bit, tries to go to Daf Yomi here and there, etc. He turns 30, 35. His kids start, going a little bit older. He turns somewhere around 40 years of age. There's a change in the person. The same guy who really wasn't learning very much in his teens, in his 20s, in his 30s, all of a sudden is a different human being. Either he's becoming more mature, or he's realizing that his time is slowly getting closer to being up, but he becomes a different sort of person. He starts learning, and he starts getting involved, and he starts getting very, very active in various Torah mostos, in different community affairs. And I've seen many an individual at that age who becomes very active on boards, very active in different community affairs. And I've also seen invariably that when that guy gets involved on the board, you had better be very careful. Because I've sat there in various meetings when, for whatever reason, this balabas would just open his mouth and just start saying things that were so just like off the cuff and so outrageous. And once the tongue began, he got more into it and more into it. And before you knew it, he was saying things that he maybe wasn't aware that he was saying, but I, sitting there, couldn't believe. And it's not one individual. I've seen it on a regular basis, that if a fellow does not have a very strong rooting in learning, then he's not in control, and it will come out. Not because of taiva, not because of some huge passion, but because the tongue goes loose, it starts prattling, words start coming out, and before you know it, the guy is saying things that are getting him into big trouble, and he becomes a very difficult person to deal with in those situations. This concept of control, of controlling my tongue specifically, is a huge, huge concept in being a developed person. You see, if you tell me we have taivas, I understand that. They're very difficult to deal with. They're very hard to control. But there is no taiva for dibur. Chavetz Chaim says the reason why Lashon Hara is considered a chil Hashem is because no one has a taiva. I gotta say this story, a taiva to tell the story. You tell a story because it's a good story, it's a good line. You just sort of whatever. But you see, there's no great overriding passion. You don't make lots of bucks. You don't get great honor for it. The reason why you prattle is because whatever. Your tongue wags, you say things, and the damage is wrought, the damage is done, and oftentimes a very, very devastating type of damage. And being aware of the fact of how powerful the tongue is, how easily we allow it to wag, is a very important concept. Because if we understand that that is the machine that I use on a regular basis, but more than that, My koach hadibur is how I present myself to the world. You see, you don't know me other than from what I say. If I walk into the room and I'm silent, you look at me as, wow, a tzelem elokim. And for all you know, I might even be a bright fellow. And it's only when I open my mouth that I show the world who I truly am. And what that means in plain language is the way that I interact with the world, the way that I show the world who I am, the way that I present myself is based on my dibur. And once you understand that, you understand how much my dibur, my words count, how much in control I must be, because you also begin to understand how much my words affect other people's way of looking at me, other people's way of looking at themselves, how they feel, how they go about their day. And the tongue is a machine that works all day long, from morning to night, morning to night, morning to night. And if you don't learn to control it, you'll end up in a lot of trouble. And the big chiddush, my friends, is not because of taiva. Very, very little desire, very, very little passion. And because of that, it's so easy. It's really just an issue of putting the brain on, activating that reticular activation system. Meaning, just like if distractibility was an issue and you would learn to focus, just like if impulsivity was an issue and you found yourself moving a little too quickly, you would train yourself to slow down. You can easily train your tongue to be quiet. And be quiet means not to fill the air with noise. In America today, there seems to be an issa doraisa of silence. Can't be silent. Can't be. There has to be noise. If there's noise, I'll put it on the radio. If it's not radio, I'll put it on the CD. There's got to be always constant chatter and noise and constant activity. That is a very costly situation, because with rov dibur, with a lot of speech, there's invariably a lot of damage, whether it be directly lashon hara, whether it be directly sheker, or just stupid things that get you in trouble. And one of the greatest things that a person can learn is to be quiet. It's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. What did Reb Shimon ben Gamliel say the best antidote he could find? Even though he grew up amongst the Chachamim, he did not grow up amongst light-hearted people. He grew up amongst people who understood life. The greatest thing that he found was shtika. And my friends, the reason is because by training yourself to control your dibur, what you're doing is you're training yourself to think before you speak, to understand the consequences, to weigh your words. And when you start training yourself in that, you become a vastly different person. You become calculated. You become a judicious individual. You become a person who actually thinks about the consequences. The reason why the ADD kid who's got impulsivity can't stop himself is because he can't think of the consequences. Before he knows it, the pen is out of your pocket in his hand. Before he knows it, he's in trouble. But that's the immature state. That's the undeveloped state of the human. When the human develops, the state of perfection is when the human being controls himself. When the human being is in charge. When you have a person like Yaakov Avinu who makes the following decision: I do not say words that hurt people. I do not bring bad tidings. I don't bring bad news more quickly than it has to be said. And that decision is his guiding principle. That decision holds him. And for 17 years, he looks at his son, knowing that his son has tainas against him, knowing that his son has complaints. He will not utter a sound, because that's a man in control. When a person understands that, and a person understands the power of that, they learn to be in control of themselves, and they learn to be in control not just of their dibur, but of everything else. And I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from Yaakov Avinu. The first lesson is what it means to be sensitive to another's pain. Even though his son had major tainas against him, I will not be a bearer of bad tidings. If it causes a person pain, I'm not going to say the words. And for 17 years he was silent. But beyond that, the ability to control, the ability to say no, and to be more than anything judicious, weighed out, thought about in your actions, and controlling your dibur is a powerful, powerful concept that Yaakov Avinu steiged in, and more than anything to understand that that's how you present yourself to the world. Knowing that the world views you not in how you look, but in how you speak, I think is a powerful shochad, a powerful bribery to train us to be careful, to be guarded in the words we say, and to learn to control the words that come out of our mouth. I want to close with an interesting chazal that I think well encapsulates this concept. During the second Beis HaMikdash, the Hashmonai dynasty ruled for over 100 years. As you know, the Hanukkah story was played out after we were victorious against the Greek Syrians. The Beis Hashmonai became the ruling dynasty, and for over 100 years there was a monarch over Yisrael from that house. However, if you remember the Shmuz, what they did was wrong. Because Yaakov Avinu said, Yosser Shevet Yehuda, Yehuda should be the Shevet of rulers. They were not from Shevet Yehuda. The Ramban explains to us, because of that, they were destined to a very, very ignoble death. And in fact, the Gemara Baba Basra tells us what happens. The Gemara says, Hurdis was a Eved. Hurdis was a slave in the house of Hashmonai. Nasan Einav Behu Yunuka. He saw a young woman who was of Hashmonai dynasty, and he decided that she was for him. However, he being a slave, there was no way that he could even approach her, no way they would ever have a shot at speaking to her. One day he heard a baskol saying, Kol avdu demar hashta matzliach, any slave who rebels now will be matzliach. He takes a sword and he begins stabbing, killing. Every last Hashmonai was killed out in the palace, almost every one of them by Hurdis himself. To the extent that this young woman, who he had eyes upon, climbed up to the roof, and she cried out in a loud voice, you should know that there's no one left from the Hashmonai dynasty. I am the last living Hashmonai, and I am now going to die. And with those words, she committed suicide. She jumped to her death. Hurdis then found himself as the monarch of Yisrael. He became the self-appointed ruler, and he became the Melech. However, obviously he was not quite accepted by the Chachamim as the Melech. He wasn't accepted by the Torah loyalists as the king, but he was acting in that position. One day, he gets the idea that he was not really very popular. And he reads in the Chumash, he has one of his people read to him the following pasuk. The pasuk says, only from amongst the Klal Yisrael should be a melech. And he says the following words. He says, who darshan this pasuk? The pasuk says, Mikerev achicha tasim alecha melech. From amongst your brothers, you should appoint a king. It doesn't say specifically he has to be Jewish. Who darshan this pasuk that only a Jew can be a king? They say to him the Rabbanan, at which point he killed out every one of the Sanhedrin, every one of the Rabbanan except Baba ben Buta. He left Baba ben Buta alive to take Eitzah from him, to ask for advice, but he blinded him. And then the Gemara tells us a fascinating discussion. For many years, Baba ben Buta was an advisor to the king, but not often did they actually have contact. And apparently Baba ben Buta did not recognize the voice of Hurdis. One day, Hurdis comes to the place where Baba ben Buta is sitting, and he says to him as follows, can you believe the chutzpah of that person? He kills out all of the Chachamim. To which Baba ben Buta says, what are we going to do? At which point Hurdis says, I'll tell you what you should do. You should curse him. Chachamim have the power of cursing. They can kill a person. You should curse him. I can't curse him. Pasuk says, Madacha lo tkalal melech, even in your private quarter, you shouldn't curse a king. Even if he's not a king, even if he's a nasi, you shouldn't do it. To which Hurdis says, no. That pasuk is only speaking when he's osei ma'isa amcha, when he's acting like a Jew. That Hurdis guy, he's not acting like a Jew. To which Baba ben Buta says, may be true, but even if he's not, I'm afraid of him. I'm afraid of the results. To which Hurdis says, there's no one here but you and I. There's no one who could tell him. You should curse him and get rid of the guy. Finish him off. At which point, Baba ben Buta says as follows. He says, Ki ofa shamayim yolich es akol, ubal kanafayim yagedover. The voices are brought through various ways. I'm not going to say a word. I will not curse him. At which point, Hurdis said, Anahu, I am that man. And he revealed to Baba ben Buta the fact that he was that person. At which point, the Gemara says, he had a terrible pachad. Hurdis had a terrible fear, and he said as follows, I've killed out all the Chachamim. Had I known that they were this careful with their words as you are, I never would have done it. Now what do I do? So Buddha said to him, what you should do is, you destroy the light of the world, You have to rebuild the light of the world, rebuild the base of Mikdash. And in fact, the Gemara tells us that he rebuilt the base of Mikdash. Whoever didn't see the bias that Hurdas built never saw beauty in his world. He rebuilt the base of Mikdash much more beautifully than it was before. But my friends, here's a very important observation. I understand why Hurdas was very impressed with the control of this Chacham. Here, according to this Chacham, there's no one in the room but he and this evil king, and yet he will go, no matter what, he won't curse this evil king. I understand how Hurdas is impressed with the control, but what makes him do tshuva? What makes him have this sudden fear, this sudden pachad, that he says, oy vey, what have I done? I've killed out the chomim. Had I known they're that careful, I never would have said anything. And all of a sudden he says, what could I do to do tshuva? What suddenly changed in his life that he felt such a pachad that he now regrets what he did? What changed? All he saw was a person in control. But my friends, I think that is the answer. What he saw was real godless, because the real greatness of a human is when the human is in control. If you want to define the greatness of a human being, it is not his power, not his money, not his wealth, not even his wisdom. The real greatness of the human is the self-control. The ability to say, I am the master of this ship. I am in charge and I will make my decisions, chart my course based on the map, based on decisions that are made min hashamayim, and that is my guidebook. And when a person is really, really in control, that's the ultimate greatness of a human, because ultimately that's the only thing we really have control over. The only thing we can control are our choices. And when Hurdas saw this, a human being in total, utter control, I will not curse him. Yes, I have this power to kill him. Yes, I was given that, but the Torah mandates exactly what I should say, how I should say it, when I should say it, and I will not say it, and nothing will get me to move off that. That's a man in control. That's a great man. When Hurdas saw this, he saw the godless of a person. He saw what he could have been, and he felt a tremendous pachad for what he had done wrong. And my friends, I think there's a tremendous lesson, because in our society, the idea of guarding your tongue, the idea of being very, very judicious, very careful, not just uttering things, not just saying whatever I said, it didn't matter, it was just words. Words are cheap. It's something that's not heard about in our society. In our society, the tongue wags, the words are said, and whatever. But understanding the power of dibur, understanding that that's the measure of the man, understanding that the world judges you based on that, but more than that, understanding that's ultimately the only thing you really have control over, your choices, and the most powerful machine you have is dibur. Learning how to control it is easy in the sense that there's no taiva, but the results are dramatic because it changes your relationships with everyone and changes ultimately who you are. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us wisdom, understanding, and ability to put this into practice.